This sanction regime continues to play a vital role in promoting peace and stability in the Horn of Africa. In Somalia, it is preventing the flow of illicit arms, and it's cutting off Al-Shabaab's funding. It is preserving natural resources for the benefit of all Somalis and for their economic empowerment. And it is helping to provide better weapons and ammunition management for the Somali security forces. And it's cutting off Al-Shabaab's funding. It is preserving natural resources for the benefit of all. This sanction regime continues to play a vital role in promoting peace and stability in the Horn of Africa. It's cutting off Al-Shabaab's funding. We have recognized the lack of evidence of Eritrean support for Al-Shabaab, and we have expressed an intention to review the measures on Eritrea in 6 months' time.
No evidence, no sanctions. The notion that the sanctions on Eritrea is somehow keeping the Horn of Africa safe, that it's somehow limiting Al-Shabaab's ability to carry out devastating attacks in the region, is an outright lie. Ever since the unjust sanctions were placed on Eritrea, starting with Resolution 1907, adopted in December 2009, and then Resolution 2023, adopted in December 2011, and without no real evidence, just fabrications and lies, Al-Shabaab has managed to carry out numerous devastating terror attacks, not only in Somalia, but also outside Somalia. Let's just have a look at a few of the attacks that made the headlines worldwide, attacks carried out after placing sanctions on Eritrea, and let's see whether these unjust sanctions based on no evidence managed to stop Al-Shabaab from carrying out these terror attacks. July 2010, just 7 months after the unjust sanctions was placed on Eritrea, without no evidence, 2 suicide bombings rocked Uganda Kampala, more than 70 people were killed, and just as much injured, while they were watching the 2010 FIFA World Cup final. Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack. September 2013, Westgate Mall, Kenya, Nairobi. Al-Shabaab militants storm the Westgate shopping mall, killing 67 people in a mass shooting. The siege lasted for 4 days.
Those who could ran for their lives. More pictures are still emerging of the shocking massacre as the Al-Shabaab extremists systematically hunted down and murdered defenseless students.
Somalia's security forces ended a deadly siege of a beachfront restaurant in its capital, in an attack that left more than 20 people dead. Islamic militant group Al-Shabab claimed responsibility in a broadcast on its online radio late Thursday.
As we have clearly seen, the unjust sanctions placed on Eritrea has not stopped Al-Shabaab from carrying out devastating attacks, and has not kept the region safe, as some would like you to believe. Al-Shabaab continues to carry out attacks well into 2017. The sanctions on Eritrea has not managed to stop these attacks, because it has nothing to do with Eritrea. There has never been any real evidence of support to Al-Shabaab. Sanctions have been placed on Eritrea for more than 7 years based on lies and fabrications. A true travesty of justice. What is the reasoning and logic behind this madness?
Do you see any evidence, for example, of Eritrea supporting Al-Shabab at this time?
It did not come up, and I have seen no evidence of Eritrea supporting Al-Shabab, no.
I mean, as a UN person, what's the rationale for the sanctions?
The sanctions are to prevent, illicit weapons flows into Somalia, financial flows, and so on. They're not exclusively limited to, in the case of Somalia, either to Eritrea or to Al-shabab.
Oh really? Firstly, as we have seen, the sanctions on Eritrea has not limited Al-Shabaabs from carrying out its operations. Secondly, illicit arms have been flowing into Somalia for many years now, which end up in the black market and then into Al-Shabaab's hands. These illicit arms are not originating from Eritrea, which has no borders with Somalia, but rather from Ethiopia and others. As late as February 2017, there has been reports of Ethiopia shipping weapons into Somalia. The Chief of Defense of the National Army of Somalia, Major General Mohammed Adan, said that Ethiopia had unlawfully, without the permission of the government of Somalia, unloaded large quantity of weapons from 2 fully loaded airplanes in Kismayo. So where's the sanctions on Ethiopia, if it's not just limited to quote-unquote Eritrea and Al-Shabaab? If the United Nations Security Council had tried to address the root cause of the problem and punish the real culprits of the chaos in Somalia, instead of using Eritrea as a scapegoat and punishing Eritrea for reasons that has nothing to do with Somalia, many lives would have probably been saved. The illegal sanction on Eritrea was instigated by the previous US administration and its puppet regime in Ethiopia that was used as the African face and also bring forth fabricated evidence and lies. The intention of the unjust sanctions was to weaken Eritrea and its defense capabilities, as to give the weak, shaky regime in Ethiopia the upper hand, who has been occupying sovereign Eritrean territories for more than 15 years, with the tacit approval and support of the previous US administrations. Year after year, the previous US administration, who has thus far been the main obstacle from lifting the sanctions, had been coming up with laughable excuses in order to maintain the sanctions it had initially instigated, despite there being no evidence.
First, on Eritrea. I'd like to point out that while Eritrea calls for the lifting of UN sanctions, as have several members of this council, the lack of engagement by Eritrea with the UN's monitoring group under a Chapter 7 mandate by this council is not the path to lifting sanctions. Eritrea has not been forthcoming with information regarding its support to regional armed groups, and while the monitoring group has not found evidence of Eritrea's support to Al-Shabab, it is difficult to corroborate this information because the monitoring group has not been allowed to visit the country in 5 years.
I thought my jokes were bad.
Clearly not, Mr. Joker, clearly not. We have the Deputy Permanent US Ambassador to the UN, telling bad jokes, weak/insulting excuses to maintain the illegal sanctions. What exactly is the US representative expecting the monitoring group to find in Eritrea? Huh? Is she expecting them to visit Eritrea and catch Eritreans handing over weapons to Al-Shabaab? Huh? Is that it? Why do they wish to insult people's intelligence by coming up with such lame excuses? The monitoring group should be monitoring arms flowing into Somalia, not visiting a country which has no borders with Somalia, and expect to find any weapons transactions or arming of Al-Shabaab. The bottom line is that
the monitoring group, in its outcome reports, for 3 years in a row, has concluded that there is not evidence of Eritrea providing assistance to Al-Shabaab.
For the third consecutive year, the monitoring group has found no evidence of Eritrean support to the Somali terrorist group Al-Shabab.
An absence of any evidence of Eritrea's support to Al-Shabaab.
The monitoring group has not found evidence of Eritrea's support to Al-Shabaab.
We have recognized the lack of evidence of Eritrean support for Al-Shabaab, and we have expressed an intention to review the measures on Eritrea in 6 months' time.
It is our view that the section referring to Eritrea as it was submitted to us is unfair. As the chair of the Sanctions Committee on Somalia and Eritrea, we have been working closely on this for almost 2 years, and this is the last time that we'll be participating in a vote on this resolution. And we are bound to say at this point that what is taking place in this committee is yet another clear example of how sanctions for some permanent members would seem to be an end in and of themselves and not a mechanism to resolve political problems or problems that arise from political issues. It was very clear in the case of Eritrea that for the third consecutive year there was no evidence whatsoever that Eritrea was collaborating or lending any support to Al-shabab. It was clearly stated that there is no evidence pointing to that.
There is no justification whatsoever for maintaining the unjust sanctions on Eritrea. Any attempts to move the goalpost towards the dire situation in Ethiopia would only further show the corrupt political motivated procedures of the United Nations Security Council. Ethiopia is a country that has been harboring armed groups against Eritrea, and has even openly admitted to doing so. Ethiopia is also violating international law by occupying sovereign Eritrean territories. If anyone should have been and should be sanctioned, is the regime in Ethiopia. If you're looking for the truth, subscribe and stay tuned for more.
فتاو حاكي